MLB owners are reportedly raging, and for the first time in a long time, the salary cap fight in baseball isn't speculation, it's being framed as inevitable. The league is finally going to rip the scab off. They better be ready to fix what's underneath.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, welcome to Locked On Pirates, your first listen every day on the number one sports network in all of the land. I'm Gary Morgan, former editor at Steel City Pirates. I've been covering the Pittsburgh Pirates since 2019, and I spend way more time than is probably healthy digging into the why behind how this sport is run, not just what happened last night. And that matters today because this is a tough subject. Before we go any further, this is not going to be an anti-Dodgers episode. Dodgers fans didn't do anything wrong. Their team is well-run, aggressive, and taking full advantage of the rules that exist. In a lot of ways, what we're seeing right now is the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. That's also why this conversation matters. So today, we're not yelling cap good or cap bad. We're talking about what actually fixes baseball, why the current system is failing a majority of players and fans, and what a real economic reset would mean, especially for teams like the Pittsburgh Pirates, because, hey, this is a Pirates show. Everydayers, you already know how this works. First-time listeners, stick with me for the next 30 minutes, and by the end of this episode, I guarantee you'll at least understand this issue a little bit better than you did coming into it. So let's start with what was actually reported and why this moment feels a little bit different from every other salary cap rumor baseball fans have heard over the last 30 years. Evan Drellick, well-respected journalist over with The Athletic, real good, especially on the inside mechanisms of baseball. I would say that's probably where he specializes in reporting. He digs into this stuff more than most. But he reported that after the Dodgers signed Kyle Tucker, Major League Baseball owners are raging and that it is now 100% certainty they'll push for a salary cap in the next collective bargaining agreement. That's not owners floating trial balloons. That's owners sending a message. The context here matters. The Dodgers aren't just spending, they're winning. They've won 2 of the last 5 World Series. They've been to 4 of the last 8. And they're doing it while operating in a payroll stratosphere that half the league can't dream about. And again, because this matters, this is not a Dodgers problem. This is not spending equals cheating. This is not small market versus big market whining. It's not just going to be a lecture on deferrals and how finances work in that regard. This is what happens when the rules allow one team to act without a meaningful ceiling, while others either can't or won't. And that's why Tony Clark's response last year was a perfect contrast to what you just heard recently here reported by Evan. Cap is not about partnership. A cap is not about growing the game. A cap is about franchise values and profits. That's what a cap is about. I'm going to give you some numbers today. A lot of this came from the great Mike DeCourcy over at the Sporting News, who did a wonderful piece on this last year. And I've kind of taken a lot of his points and added in some of my own here, but he just laid it out so perfectly. There's almost no way once you read it that you could rearrange it a whole heck of a lot. So I personally think Tony Clark is basically just doing what unions do. Yeah, we don't want this, blah, blah, blah. I understand. He dodges the actual problem, though. Because the question isn't why owners want a cap. The question is what system has actually already shown that it can work for players and fans over time. Especially when right now it's pretty clear MLB's system isn't doing that. See, the entity that gets left in the dust by almost everyone in these discussions are the fans. Fans everywhere. I'll touch on it later, but I have a heart for what implementing something like this would be in markets where spending has really ballooned. Hear me out today. What I'm going to try to do is illustrate what exactly a cap is, what it changes, how it's way more complicated than boom, here's a cap system. Now any of us can win. Owners are legitimately and vocally leaking strategically their displeasure. And it's drawing battle lines. The stated enemy is going to be the Dodgers or Mets, but make no mistake, the real enemy is the fans of a baseball team not in the top 10 media market, at least periodically. See, you're the ones who are most upset. If you just took your role and sat back knowing that you were rooting for the team that the Globetrotters were playing when those teams came to town and smiled like a butcher's dog while you did it, I bet they're still rolling towards a work stoppage. But you, the non-mega market fan, are the evidence. You're the ones that aren't showing up as much. You're the ones that aren't paying for cable just so you don't miss your beloved team. In part because while you can accept it's harder for your team, in fact, I bet part of you respects them for being a little bit harder. You also can't help but notice how near impossible it is, and further, how short-lived it almost always is going to be. I truly believe owners in those markets knowingly don't do what they could. But the gap is so real and in your face now. And the fans are, for lack of a better way of putting it, woke enough on the subject that owners no longer have answers they're capable of giving. Fans of baseball, in many cases, watch other sports. Eventually, this was always going to come to a head. Eventually, cities that have other sports, they're going to start to wonder why their team can't have their star stay when the other team they root for can keep them. And, they're going to start rooting for a cap system because they understand that the team they root for that's being successful is also a beneficiary of a salary structure. Something that makes everything work. Something that forces the malcontents and the ne'er-do-wells to do better. Or get out if they don't want to. Something that allows players to continue to make money. Lots of it. That's the kind of stuff we're going to talk about today. First thing we're going to touch on, because I think to really understand why this conversation is changing, I think we need to really talk about who the current system is actually serving and who it isn't. We always talk about what a salary cap would do that would be so catastrophic to players and who it would make rich and who it would make less rich and who is the current system actually helping? That's kind of a core question, wouldn't you think? Let's tackle it when we come back. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with the local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything: the W-2s, self-employment forms, the work you get for every deduction. You can upload documents, go about your day, get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Hey everybody, welcome back to Locked On Pirates. If you have not already done so, check out the Everydayers Club. Go down to the link in the notes and hit the Supercast link to go check it out. It's $5 a month, $50 a year. Lots of fun conversations go on over there. Sometimes we argue about baseball. It's fun. I mean, I love it. It's kind of reminds me of Twitter a little bit, way back when Twitter used to be just actually people that wanted to talk. So pretty cool stuff. Go check it out if you get a chance. Before we decide whether a salary cap is good or bad, I think we need to ask a more uncomfortable question. Who is Major League Baseball's Player Association really defending when it fights against structural change? Because more than half of Major League Baseball players are earning under $1 million a year. And more than 20% of them earn at or near the league minimum. And some of those players are stars, all-stars, cornerstones, franchise-defining talents. They are megastars such as Paul Skenes. Meanwhile, MLB is generating record revenues. So that disconnect right there, that doesn't exist in the NFL. It doesn't exist in the NBA. It doesn't exist in the NHL. Those leagues all have one thing in common: a real salary structure. Not just a cap and a floor. The argument that a salary floor alone would fix baseball sounds good until you think it through, because baseball talent is finite. Forcing low revenue teams to spend more while allowing high revenue teams to spend without limit doesn't create parity. It just makes the same players more expensive for teams already struggling to compete. A floor without a cap is not reform, it's just inflation. The uncomfortable part for the Players Association, I think, is that the current system is systematically suppressing young player earnings. You get 6 or 7 years of team control. You get pre-arb wages. You get arbitration anchored to artificially low anchor points. I mean, that's actually one thing Scott Boras is trying to do right now with Tarek Skubal, is break that mold. He's not allowing Tarek Skubal to be anchored to a low ball equivalent. So they're asking for the moon. They're shooting for the moon there, because he's trying to shatter the arbitration ceiling anyway, which, you know what? He should. I actually don't disagree with him on this process. I think the arbitration process is a mess. I don't understand how players have allowed it to remain the mess that it is, frankly. It takes way too long to make real money in baseball for how hard it is to get here. For how many years you have to put in making relatively nothing, even though they've started paying minor league players better, to get here, and then have it take another 4, 5, 6, 7 years before you really get a crack at making bank on the open market. And even then, you better have put in a heck of a career, right? And I guess, if you want to just get down to the core of it, treating young players like that in any professional sport ultimately causes some multi-sport athlete kids to choose other sports, at least quicker to payday sports. I'm not sure what the Players Association is going for here. That's not protecting labor. That's protecting top labor, maybe. That's basically, if you had a union that was only really getting the back of all of the top paid management structure, and all of the foot soldiers were just continuing to toil while they're watching other leagues pay way better. I'm sorry. I think that's irony. It's irony that every capped league has produced record-breaking contracts, rising salaries, and far fewer work stoppages than baseball. So when Tony Clark talks about instability, the evidence just does not back him up. I don't believe that they speak for the vast majority of the players. I think a lot of that was evidenced last time that this came up when the players' board voted down the agreement that they ultimately signed, and the players at mass overrode them to get back to work. And you know what lesson they learned from that work stoppage? Tony Clark made sure they saved a little bit more money this time so that they can withstand a longer work stoppage so that they don't have a revolt. So what I'm proposing here is that ownership needs to come to the table with solutions, not just arguments, not just saying the salary cap buzzword and setting everybody off. Bring this information to them that you have. It's out there. Show them what you can create. Show them what you can create together. An environment where players can continue to get bigger and bigger salaries year over year. Teams can have at least better shots where stupidity or bad luck are the things that prevent you from winning versus inability to actually compete financially. You'll be able to expand cleaner. There's so many upsides to going with something like this that I think the owners can sell a clean package. It's not going to make every owner happy. Believe me, it's not. I'm under no delusion of that, but it doesn't have to. It only takes 8 to gum the works up. And when you've got Evan Drellich reporting something like that, I can tell you that that's not something anyone would say, even a leaker, unless they knew they had more than that, because you have to make room for some defectors. In fact, the last time, if I understand correctly, they started out with about 10. And then by the time it really got to like we're in a labor strife territory, it had backed down to 8. And they held on firm for something, and then they ended up giving everything up at the end. They got next to nothing out of that lockout. This next time, if they do it again, I mean, I don't think they can afford to just show up and have a fight about a word that I think that the general consensus with the public has already taken in as poison. So reframe the argument. Talk about it as a framework to make the game better for everyone, and focus it on the fans. Focus it on us. Focus it on making sure that baseball is a game that everybody in every market can turn on their TV and think that their team maybe doesn't have the best team this year, or maybe they don't have a shot at all this year, but you can see the building blocks and they certainly have the cap space to do a heck of a lot more next year. Because it shouldn't be a situation where you fight like hell to put together something that maybe gives you a 2 or 3 year span crack at just getting into a playoff. That's not parity. And it's not just the Pirates' problem, unfortunately. And recent success from some teams that used to be smaller market or attempting to masquerade as having more money because they've been socking it away for long enough to pull that off temporarily, or they're even preparing for the upcoming salary floor that they fully expect to fight for, and they want to be closer to it than further away. Whatever the reason, this is escalating beyond any fans complaining or sourpuss fans in certain markets. It's escalating because inevitably this is where it was always going to go. When you leave power unchecked, you often wind up regretting leaving the power unchecked, because eventually it goes where you always feared it could have. This is where things get really interesting, because even if MLB does implement a salary cap, the cap itself is only the beginning. What happens after is where the sport actually changes, and that's kind of what I'm most fascinated in. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to Locked On Pirates. If you want to continue the conversation with me and you're not in the Discord, hit me up on socials, GaryMO2007 on X or Twitter, or whatever you're calling it. Facebook, Gary Morgan. YouTube, leave a comment. I'll check those out. Let's see. If baseball moves to a true salary structure, it's not going to be a clean overnight flip. There would be a grace period. Teams would need to have time to come into compliance. And that period would create absolute chaos in a good way. You can stretch this out. It doesn't have to be like 1 year immediate. It could be over the course of 3 years or something along those lines. But you can even grandfather in certain things. Like if they've deferred money, you just kind of call it even, because how could you possibly keep track of the math and figure it out? And I think that you could get away with that as a selling point to some of the bigger market teams that perhaps have all that deferred money. Like you could basically say, like, listen, here's the deal. In order for accepting this, we're not going to tell you ever that has to count against the cap, because that's not fair to the future here. If this is going to work, we want you to be competitive too. So we don't want you fighting with one arm behind your back. Concession, right? Big market teams would absolutely need to have a little bit of relief, I would think. From bloated contracts, I think some of them might actually look at it as a good thing. Small market teams would be forced to spend to meet a floor. And that means contracts stop being anchors and start being assets. You might see this with, let's see, a team like Pittsburgh. They wouldn't suddenly become equal to Los Angeles overnight. But for the first time, they'd be required participant, not an optional one. And the ripple effects go far beyond payroll. You can't keep 6 or 7 years of team control in a capped system. You can't pay elite players $800,000 and call it competitive balance. So I would think arbitration, if it would stay at all, timelines would have to change. Free agency timelines would have to change. Roster flexibility rules like options would have to evolve. Maybe you'd have everybody at the AAA level is seen as being on the practice squad or something. There may have to be some kind of change like that. You probably don't need the Rule 5 draft anymore either. Its entire purpose is to prevent talent hoarding, something a cap system would already handle naturally. The league would become more like the NFL in one critical way. Every team has choices. You can build around a superstar and sacrifice depth. You can build depth and cycle stars. You can go young and cheap at premium positions and spend elsewhere. Sometimes you'll choose wrong. Sometimes it won't work. But it won't be because of zip code anymore. I mean, in Pittsburgh, that means something huge. If a system like this existed long term, keeping a Paul Skenes wouldn't be a fantasy. Keeping a Connor Griffin wouldn't be impossible. It would be a choice with consequences, just like everyone else has. I think what this could spawn would just be some really interesting things. I think you'd see teams trying to shed bad contracts, and all the teams trying to get up to the floor. Remember, they have just as much pressure as the teams trying to get under the cap. Again, you could spread this out over 3 years, but think about the downward pressure on a team like the Padres, for instance. They have no hope of getting rid of Manny Machado's contract. It's way too long. And it costs way too much for when he's way too old. We all know how that's going to end. They're going to end up having a lot to owe him after he retires. That's just the truth. And he's probably going to be much less than he is long before he actually hangs them up. But if you're one of these teams that hasn't been spending, and there's a salary floor implemented, it's going to be very close to the cap. In the NFL, for instance, it's a rolling cap, and it's usually about 90% of whatever the salary cap is that goes up every year. Doesn't have to be how MLB does it, but it's directly tied to revenue. Every time the league makes more money, the players make more money. So do the owners. No denying that. If you're one of the people out there that hates billionaires and you're watching sports religiously, I got to tell you, they're all billionaires. I don't know what to say. They all are. But their billions are sometimes capital B's and sometimes lowercase b's. All right? This won't break baseball, though. There'd be ways around a lot of this. You're probably going to have an expansion draft, too, if Manfred has his way. So you'd have another mechanism to move some players. Now, what do you do if those players have a no-trade clause? Yeah, sure. Been there before. Can't move them then. That's the way it is. It's up to that team to be creative about how they find a way out of it. I already offered an olive branch for whacking those deferral payments just to get them to sign on the dotted line and quit pouting. But they're going to have to pay for basically the pleasure of what they're having right now. And that sucks for the fans. It's not fair. But I could see a team like the Dodgers. Listen, I'm not going to say it'd be good for them, but just let me throw an example out at you. They've got Dalton Rushing. It was just in the news the other day that the Dodgers are really high on him and they think he's really come along as a catcher, and they're excited about him. But they've got Will Smith as their starting catcher. He's going to stay the starting catcher. So Dalton Rushing is either going to learn how to play another position, and I don't know what that would be. First base is kind of taken. In fact, hey, look around the Dodgers roster, everything's kind of taken. So that's a rookie that's just going to rot. Well, under a salary structure system, that sort of stuff changes too. It's real hard to do that sort of thing long term in a salary structure system, because you would have incentive to move Will Smith and let Dalton Rushing move into his place and take advantage of the fact that his salary is lower. It won't be as low as it is today, but lower. And you offload Will Smith for prospects. Or, God forbid, they allow them to trade draft picks. There's a lot of things that this system could be. And what I would love for it to be more than almost anything would be for these two sides to just come together and talk. That's all. So that we don't have to go through losing baseball. If Major League Baseball finally tears this scab off, it's going to bleed. Some fan bases are going to feel punished for competence. Some teams, they're going to suffer from mistakes they made years ago. That part isn't fair, and it's worth acknowledging. But that won't heal. That won't heal if it keeps continuing down this current path. If baseball loses games to a stoppage and comes back with nothing more than a tighter luxury tax and cosmetic revenue sharing, then nobody was serious about fixing anything. I don't care what the solution's called. I care about the outcome. If every market is financially capable of keeping any player at once, whether it chooses to or not, if every fan base feels like failure comes from bad decisions instead of baked in disadvantage, then baseball's healthier. As it stands, I've never seen anything but a real salary structure lead to labor peace. Rising revenues, rising salaries, and a league where market size stops dominating every conversation. Tomorrow, we're going to get back to regular order. Sorry, I thought this was very important. Even if it's not everyone's cup of tea, I hope you at least felt it was fair. And nobody wants the game to shut down. I wish everyone could just see reason and agree without incident, because it's better for everyone. That's the argument I tried to make today, and I hope I at least made you feel that way. I hope I at least showed you that there's a way that it really could work for everyone if they are willing to just accept that things are not Shangri-La right now. And just because one market is making a ton of money, and admittedly a ton of money for the league, it should be understood that the entire league, especially the entire pool of players, is not feeling the love. So maybe the players' union should support all the players. Remember, we're serious about Pirates baseball because somebody has to be. Let's go Bucks.